Good morning. I gotta move the mic. Good morning. This is Plain to Win with me, Mark Henderson Leary, and my good friend Bread Freyer. Did I say Bread Fryer?
I think you did, but I knew what you meant.
Bread Fryer. Bread Fryer. That sounds like
bread.
That sounds. 3 easy payments. And you get the Bread Fryer.
Hey, if I could slap a logo on it and sell it, I'm in.
Yeah, man.
Late night.
How are you, Bread Fryer? You're frying some bread.
The Bread Fryer. That actually sounds delicious.
It does.
Fried bread.
It does.
Would that be like a funnel cake? Is that fried bread? Is that?
Oh yeah, man. Oh jeez, there's a lot of good fried bread out there. I guess a donut is in essence of fried bread, isn't it?
Seems reasonable.
Yeah,
I like that. I'm on board with the Bread Fryer. We have just, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to How Ideas Are Created. This is Entrepreneurship 101, hosted by Mark Henderson Leary and Bread Fryer.
That tells you just exactly how many beers I've had this morning.
Beer is not a breakfast drink. Vodka is the breakfast drink.
That's funny. I don't know. I'm reminded. This is a geeky thing, but there was one of the most well-known beer sort of writers, opinion pundit, I guess, was a guy named Michael Jackson. Not related, but he was known for his drinking of beer, and it was definitely breakfast at the conference. And he shows up with 2 Heineken because they go well with eggs. That's the beer for your eggs.
Might have a problem if.
Tip of the day. Everybody, you can turn it off right now. It's not going to get better than that. You got your tip for the day. Your beer for your eggs is Heineken. Now, I have to confess, I've not tried it. And now as I'm saying it, I feel like I should have at some point. Maybe I'm not going to do it in the morning, but I do eat eggs at all times of the day. So maybe my next lunch eggs situation. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are those vacation philosophies that say you can't drink all day unless you start first thing in the morning. So,
I don't take my vacations as seriously as I should. I guess I'm really realizing I'm kind of
a no. You're probably treating yourself better.
I'm an amateur. I'm a total amateur.
Yeah, that's okay. In this case, that's a good thing.
In fact, a couple of good friends of mine we took a tour of the country. My last year of college, or very near it, to do research on brew pubs. It was my hope to open up a brew pub as a restaurant. And so we drove many thousand miles west and north and back down. And
wow.
So with managing the geography of city to city to get the right amount of stuff, you would end in an evening somewhere and you get to the hotel and then get up in the morning, you have to get to some place, and without wasting a bunch of the day, you'd want to get to them when they opened up. And after 4 or 5 days of driving, it's 11 o'clock, huh? Beer, anyone? No? All right. So it was cool for a day. It's oh, cool. They're opening. Let's go in there. Let's order the beers. And it's just you guys in for beer right now? This sucks.
Too much of a good thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Sounds like you were a little bit ahead of your time. I mean, the brew pubs are huge right now, and you might have been just 20 years ahead of your time.
Well, me and all the brew pubs that opened at that time, because they all were glorious and well-funded, and particularly in Houston. Multi-million-dollar brew pubs that all evaporated in the coming 5 years or so. So I like the rest of everybody, had to take a different path. And so I did more restaurant after college, but then I moved into IT, obviously, and the rest of the story that everybody doesn't know.
Yeah.
I can pretend like everyone knows my story.
Do you want to tell it?
No.
Okay. Fair. So what are we going to talk about today, Mr. Henderson Leary?
Let's talk about questions.
Okay.
In the pre conversation, we were talking about how easy it is to make an assumption, and how kids in college, for example, myself no different, would hear something that seemed very true, and I would find purpose. I'd find purpose in my truth of the information, and then I would go off and take action. And oftentimes, good things happened, and there was community, and there was things that happened with that. But I learned in life that there was more to the story. And I lived an entire life based on my ideology. And And now years later, I've learned to teach my daughter what I call check the tape. If you hear so and so said this, I say, that might be what they said, but you might check the tape, and might check the actual press conference and find out what was said after that, and what was the tone of voice, and what was the actual question, and what was one missing word that might change the context, and there might be something to that. So getting to the truth, getting to the facts, what seems like subtleties ends up being quite transformative in the understanding and what you do with it. Mm-hmm. Which is oftentimes difficult because sometimes it's easier just to be ignorant. Sometimes it's really nice to just be righteous and not have to question. But when somebody brings to you the details and the nuance and the grayness and the difficulties of choosing, that's actually very taxing sometimes to try to figure out the gray. So those of us who choose to enter that, the uncertainty, it can be very uncomfortable. But this may relate to
living off of sound bites versus data.
Yeah, for sure. And so this happens in leadership. This happens in sales, and sometimes we get comfortable, right? Sometimes that we become expert. We feel we're experts in the needs of our clients. And there's a phenomenon in the sales world. I'll tee this right back up to you. Do you know where I'm going with this already?
Assumptions and trying to close off of mild interest and curiosity.
Well, yes, all of that, and the questioning strategy, and even the dummy curve, right? The dummy curve of we get very comfortable in what we think the answers are, and we get lazy.
Love it. Yeah.
And I have discovered that people are compensated in monetary terms in direct proportion to the degree of chaos and uncertainty they're willing to take on and try to and provably convert into chaos, into structure rather. So you take the chaos. So like if there's a market that's difficult to tame, if it's difficult to hunt new clients, new accounts, the net new account manager, that's the highest paid position in the entire company. Go take uncertainty, people you don't know, and turn them into a predictable revenue stream. And so the degree of uncertainty you're willing to tackle is direct proportion. And the difficulty, right? So, and I actually take this all the way into sports and music, right? So when music is taking absolutely nothing and turning it into something interesting and transforming the entire audience into an entertained thing from nothing, is just amazing. Sports, the battle, to go into the chaos and at the highest level of potentially losing and all of the chaos that the other team is trying to bring to you. This is why these people get paid so much, because they're just conquering the universe. And so as a salesperson, as a leader, as an entrepreneur, as a visionary, to the degree that what you're doing is very predictable, it could, sometimes people do enjoy an industry that is lucrative and predictable for a while. We know the margins come right out of that, and that becomes very commoditized. That's what a commodity is. But if your commitment is to take something that's just never been done before, and it's dynamic and it's difficult and it's up and down, then you very likely your commitment to tackling that fear will and keep going back out there. That's what pays big money. So talk about the dummy curve, man. I want to stop talking.
No. So it's interesting because so much of what you said, all of it that you said is spot on, and so much of what you said hits different nerves, right? From the professional side, right? Whether it's from a leadership perspective or a sales perspective, but also from the personal side, having young kids and you having young kids as well. Teaching them the concept of don't take things at face value. If you have an opinion, which we encourage, I highly encourage my kids to have opinions. To be passionate about your opinions, just be educated on them, right? Don't go in because you heard a soundbite and say, well, this is just terrible, or I think we should be doing this. Go do some research, ask questions, check the tape. Just make sure that you know what you're talking about before you share your opinion, your perspective, especially if you're going to debate, which, my family are huge debaters. We love to have intellectual debates and conversations. But in the sales world, the same thing applies. And in leadership, oftentimes we hear sound bites or we hear snippets of things that sound interesting that we begin to pursue. So in the sales world, a prospect might say something like, Yeah, we're really interested in looking at what you offer and how you might be able to help us. Well, that sounds like a very hot prospect. That sounds like somebody who's interested in buying to a lot of salespeople. To other people, it sounds very vague and wishy-washy and non-committal. And so the concept that Mark is referring to, the dummy curve, is, and I don't know that there's a more current reference, but Columbo. Columbo is the old TV detective who played the dummy, right? He was super smart, great at his job, but he always played the dummy when he was investigating crimes. And his shtick was, help me understand. He always had a cigar, right? He always had a cigar in his hand, and he was always like, help me understand. I'm confused. You said you were here at 5:00, and then you were over there at 7. What road did you take to get there? Okay, that's got like 6 lights. I mean, he really slow played the dummy, and the prospect or the suspects, thinking that they had one over on this guy because he was an idiot. They would answer the questions, and then he would back them into a corner. And then he always had to, one last question. And that one last question was always the boom, gotcha, right? Sales is similar. When a prospect says, hey, I'm interested, love to hear what you have to say, etc. The dummy approach is just asking stupid questions to identify the details, identify more, get them talking, right? Because the person asking the questions is the person that's in control of the conversation. And so if someone says, hey, I'd love to hear more about what you do, I would say, I appreciate you saying that, but what is it that you want to hear more about? Help me understand. Well, I want to hear more about your offerings and tell me about the training programs. Well, that's great. Tons I could share with you. Happy to do it. Love talking about myself, but just to make sure it's a good use of your time, what specifically are you looking to do? What challenges are you trying to resolve? What are you identifying on your sales team that needs to be remedied? What are your people not doing that you wish they were doing? And just asking questions. And a couple of things happen, right? Number one, most importantly, you get a better understanding for the situation. You learn, right? Our value in sales is derived more by the information we acquire than by the information we dispense. So you learn. Number two is they talk. And the more they talk, the more comfortable they are with our engagement, because people's number one topic that everybody loves to talk about is themselves. And so as they're talking, they're sharing, and rapport is being built, right? Trust, credibility, respect. And so there's so much value that comes from just us dummying up. But what happens is you get these salespeople, we're all guilty of it at some point or another in our professional career. We get too educated, we get too smart for our own good, and we want to be the smartest person in the room. So whenever prospects start asking us questions, what do we start doing? We start responding, we start talking, we start sharing. And now the tables are flipped, right? So the dummy curve, yeah. Just dummy up and ask questions.
So there's two ends of this I want to make sure are clear, or at least addressed. From a visionary leadership perspective and from a sales perspective. They go together and they manifest a little bit differently. They rhyme with each other. So the sales situation of getting comfortable. If your sales organization gets stuck because they start making assumptions and the deals they don't close at the last second. That's so expensive, so frustrating. Your closing ratio drops off. What is that? That comes from a complacency. But there is a balance, right? So if everything is dealt like a custom deal, then everything's so slow and expensive, and you're doing stuff, you're reinventing the wheel. So having a process is really important. But it's really important. It's really critical to understand that balance of sales team of like, here's the sales process, here's why people typically buy, here's the things you can get to know quickly. Don't make assumptions. Don't get too comfortable, and that's a real sales management, I think, art form, to make sure you teach your team how to ask really good questions and ask, is that really true? I sure would hate to waste your time and mine, and make sure you're pursuing excellence and efficiency. Pardon me, not to the nth degree, but also take this up to the visionary leadership level. The companies I work with and know that grow the fastest are obsessed with their customers' needs, and they're constantly questioning everything, and they're seeing everything move bit by bit, inch after inch, year after year, toward solving a problem and solving problems of the individuals. And it comes from this obsession with sort of pursuit of the obstacles, and it's an almost continuous flow of questions. And so those are the rapid growing companies. There are many organizations who are growing, 10, 20% a year, and they have an industry and they understand it and it's smooth and cool. And if that's your thing, that's nothing wrong with that. It is important, I think, to understand your industry, how fast it moves, and ask those questions. Is this going to change? Hey, we're in plumbing, and that's never going to. Data and internet's are never going to change what we do until it does. So ask those questions and make sure you're sure there's no IoT plumbing that's coming your way, which there could be. But the technology and science companies, it's constant. And to be anything short of curious and rigorous on a constant basis and challenging, is that true? Do I understand it? It's just so problematic. And I definitely see companies who try to kind of outsource the thinking of what their customer is wanting and needing, and it is very expensive because it doesn't work, in my opinion. So you have to get curious and challenge those questions, or challenge those clients. Why do you want this? Do you need this? And end up ultimately as a visionary making a decision on what you see, because for so many clients, prospects, if you're the edge of your game, of the industry in particular, if they knew what they wanted, they would have gotten it or done it. And so they're usually not going to be that great at telling you exactly what they need. So you, as the visionary who can aggregate all this data and all these stories and all the emotions, you can say, I see the patterns and I can try some stuff. And that's your power as an innovator, to not make assumptions, to just be so humble and so curious and to try stuff, and then it doesn't work. And you go back and you try something else, and then things start to work. And then you can kind of move that down into the organization.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll even, as we continue to take these stairs of discovery of the groups and how questioning works out, I'd even bring that back internally from a leadership perspective. Too often leaders don't ask questions of their team, right? They create this vision and this game plan in a vacuum, maybe with the executive team, without soliciting feedback from the team, from the people in the streets, from the people in the shop, from the frontline staff to the back of the house, but getting people to contribute to where are we now, what's good, bad, and indifferent, where are we going, what do y'all think? I mean, how many strategic planning sessions have you run, Mark, where the leader of the organization had a vision for what they believed they wanted to achieve? But whenever they opened up the questions to the executive committee or to the people that were participating in the strategic plan, people had different opinions, and maybe they were grander. Hey, there's no reason why 50 million should be our goal. Our goal should be 75 million. And let me tell you why, because of this, this, and this. Oh, I was going to come up short.
Yeah.
Or, well, I think it should be 150, and somebody else chimes in and goes, 150, that's not realistic. It really should be 80, because if we set it for 150, we're going to set ourselves up for failure, and we don't have the bandwidth to be able to grow that fast, and capacity, and da. And so I think seeking first to understand, Stephen Covey, is one of the most important things. And I know for some people, being inquisitive is somewhat natural. Right? I've always been inquisitive. I just always have. And I think that's why I had success early on in sales, because I always just asked a lot of questions. I've always claimed to not be a smart person. And maybe that's why I've always asked so many questions, is because I don't give myself credit for being smart. Yeah. And so rather than feeling like I know all the answers, I'm really diligent in seeking answers. And I think it's important that if you don't have that innately in you, is to begin to think about what are the questions that I should always be asking, and in what situations. And it's just like, something as simple as networking. In our professions, I've spent a lot of time at events, right? Whether it's networking events or going to customer, clients are always taking us to exotic locations because they're having national sales meetings and things like that. And a lot of times I get to take my wife with me. And she says, I'm not comfortable in these settings. I don't like talking to people. She's kind of an introvert. And she says, what do I do? And I say, look, just ask 3 questions, right? And as long as you have 3 questions queued up, you'll get them talking. They'll, by the time you're done with those 3 questions, somebody is going to have interrupted you and you'll be on a different path, right? But always have 3 questions, where are you from? What do you do? And what brought you here? Right? Those 3 questions will get you talking, and they'll spawn other topics, and you'll start talking about family and kids. But as long as you have a couple of questions queued up, you'll always be comfortable.
I think there's a lot to that, right? So taking a step back, listening to you talk about being inquisitive, I was always curious, but I did not learn to be inquisitive. I felt like I needed to know the answer. So I worked hard to figure out the answer without asking questions. And that was cool, and it impressed people. And it is totally useless as a leader. It's very problematic, because how it manifests in many ways, the worst way that I can think of, and there's probably more, is having done all the work with no one else in the process. And so I show up super excited, and people have questions or challenges. And I'm like, no, I've already thought that through. That's not an issue. And my intensity and enthusiasm is such that people are like, I guess he doesn't need my feedback, so I'll stay quiet next time and just listen. And so it totally shut down my teams. And so that was my DNA. And I've had to learn how to change that and bring people into the process earlier, and be ready to retool the process, and be ready to just do more reps, actually. I'm going to roll it out, and it's going to be really broken because historically that's the case, and I'm going to have to be more iterative in longer scale. People I know who are just naturally inquisitive and just calmer and starting the conversation earlier, they don't have to do that sort of second round reboot that I have to do more naturally. I'm working my way through that. A lot of the teams I work with have that same problem, though, so I can coach them through it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that perspective.
And one of the questions that you talk about adding, and I think maybe some tools we could leave people with, are some questions to add to the default question list. I love, if you're going to if you don't like networking, and a lot of people don't, like, you think outgoing visionaries, and who are like, oh, they're very extroverted. Like, they're loud. And we're loud, and we have strong opinions. That doesn't mean we actually like talking to people we don't know. I'm much more comfortable talking to people that I already know. And if I go to a new room of people who I don't know, I'm like, can I leave now? And so I have to push myself through that. But when you're introducing yourself to people, where you're from, what got you here, what started you in the business, that's a great one. How did that start? How did what got you into that? I learned that one. Going back to the management, going back to inside the leadership team, one of the most powerful questions I have really started using a lot is if there's a conflict on the team, and we start talking about whatever. There's all this information flowing around, and it's information is very distracting. And people kind of rationalize. It's very common for me to see somebody who's kind of clearly, upset about something, and someone else and they're back and forth on this. And I say, stop. How big an issue is this for you on a 1 to 10 scale? And usually I'm plugging into something, I can see it going back and forth. I'm expecting this to be a high number. And most of the time it's 8, 9, and 10, because that's what I picked up on. And something about that question changes the game. And people suddenly realize that, wait, this information is not really what's at play here. This is a big deal. And the curiosity goes way up in that moment when they realize this is an 8, 9, or a 10 out of it. From
the other person's side, or from the person's
for the
side?
whole room. Okay. Everybody, the whole room.
Yeah.
And so the game changes. And then
it becomes real.
It becomes real. Yeah. And sometimes people will start crying because they were moved out of the intellectual brain into the emotional side of being who they are. And they're like, I've been fighting for this for 6 months or 6 years or whatever. And suddenly somebody put a spotlight on how big a deal this is for me. And the game totally changes. So put that in your quiver. If you got the debate going, and sometimes you might pick up a 2 and you're like, well, why are we talking about this? Let's move on. And but usually if your senses are going up, this is this 8, 9, or 10, and that can change the game. Well, why is this such a big deal? Because you feel like you're wasting your life. You're sacrificing so much. It's just affecting you at home. And suddenly we're into what matters. So put that one in your quiver. It's a really powerful leadership question.
Love that. Yeah, I do. It's a great one. Yeah, and I think being prepared. I don't think people spend enough time really thinking about what are the questions. If I'm going into a conflict resolution meeting with employees, how much time are we spending pre-call planning and thinking about, okay, what are the key questions I need to identify? What questions am I going to ask this person? Which question am I going to ask this person? And how am I going to find the common ground? Or if I'm a leader going into a strategic planning meeting, okay, what questions am I going to be asking? Where's my outline? Am I just doing a data dump, or am I actually soliciting feedback? If I'm a salesperson going on a sales call, what are the top 10 to 12 questions I'm going to be asking for this sales call that I need to uncover to identify whether or not it's a good fit? I don't think people spend enough time game planning and really thinking about. I mean, just like the networking. I'm with you. I don't like networking. I don't enjoy it. It's not a. It's an important piece to the job, but I don't enjoy doing it. And so, I've got a handful of questions and I've got goals that I'm trying to achieve, but I've thought about it beforehand, so I don't walk in and just blindly, start groping around in the dark. It's important to have thoughts before you roll into it.
I love that. It's a skill that we teach a lot, and it's the skill of prediction, and it ties in very well with kind of how this opened with the ability to conquer chaos and turn it into order. And there's a bit of a contradiction in that if you're trying to if I didn't plan it, I did.
I know, but that was good. That was good. And you got 3 minutes to wrap it up, which is fantastic that you brought it full circle. That was well done. I'm giving you credit for that one.
I try to listen. So this idea of chaos and prediction going together, that what's coming in the future and how are we going to handle it? Well, I don't know. Prediction's hard. Humans are very bad at actual prediction. We know this from the stock market and all the things that go with that. But as it turns out, all the great leaders talk about, plans being worthless, but all the planning being essential. And so the planning, the process of stopping and saying, and this is what's so crazy. We can talk about the various types of prediction, long-term prediction, which is the goal setting and in the future and the vision and all that, anything 90 days and beyond. But there's also the short-term prediction, which is, getting through the week as expected, on time, on budget. The one thing that unifies all that cool stuff that sounds cool to teach, and it is lots to teach, is taking a minute to look forward. That's it. That's the discipline. The discipline is like, take a minute and ask yourself, if you're doing quarterly planning, you say, what's going to happen this quarter? Just ask the dang question. Like, am I going to have to hire somebody? Is there going to be seasonal ups and downs? Is there going to be lots of vacation? We got hurricane season. It is not like a super rigorous intellectual exercise for most people. What it takes is the time. Just like stop and on a weekly basis for your week, taking if you're going to do something that you're not good at, or that it does involve you turning chaos into structure, like networking, which is exactly what that is. There's a bunch. Who's going to be there? I don't know. How many people? I don't know. What are they going to say? I don't know. Take a minute and say, what do you want out of this? What could go wrong? What could go right? Do a little of that and get 10 times more out of it. Meetings, when you prepare for the meeting, how much better is a meeting when you know what the agenda is and you know what you're going to talk about and you know what the numbers already say, as compared to like, all right, get me up to speed, guys. It's so different.
Yeah. That's the meetings that didn't need to be done. Yeah.
The meeting about the meeting. Like this is okay.
Fill me in on the data. Fill me in on the data I could have looked at before I got here.
Yeah. Now this meeting is over, we're ready to have the meeting.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Well done, man. Well done. Good conversation today.
Well, good stuff. So let's wrap it up. The idea of conquering chaos, turning it into order. That's your ticket to making money, making a difference, making an impact. That's what people need. People need the world to be more ordered. That's what we crave. We want the chaos and the danger to be at bay. And so finding ways to do it, getting comfortable with your highest value job, going out there and addressing it with humility and openness and asking good questions and getting out of your comfort zone on a regular basis. And one of the best ways to get comfortable with that and excel in that is do a little prediction. Just run the traps. Then your mind, with a friend, with a pre-call plan, with a sales coach or your leadership coach, asks what could happen, what do we need to know, what might happen, what we're going to need to spend money on, and what can we be ready for, and what questions you want right in the quiver so you can ask more questions and do less talking. That's it for today. You good, man?
I'm good. That was a good one. That went quick. Thanks, Mark.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you. It went great. We'll see you next time on whatever this thing's called. Plan to Win with Mark and Brad.
Next week. See you.
See you, man.